Hello everyone, welcome to Sleepy Crimes Hub. I'm here with you tonight to help you relax and slowly fall asleep. I know many of you are watching this video to rest your mind. So before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Now get comfortable, close your eyes if you like, take a deep breath and let go of the day. Let's gently begin with case 1. It was a quiet village in the depths of Altai Krai, Russia, a place where everyone knew each other's names and life seemed simple, orderly, and safe. But beneath the calm surface, darkness was quietly waiting, hidden behind the face of someone who seemed ordinary, even admirable. The year was 1989, and the sleepy village of Zelianaya Dubrava would soon become the starting point of a string of disappearances that would leave the community terrified and the nation in shock. In the shadows of small towns and university halls, a predator was moving, invisible yet watching, patient and calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. This is the chilling story of Vitaly Manishin, a man whose respectable life would hide some of the most heinous crimes in Russian history. Vitaly Manishin was born on November 10, 1971, in Zelianaya Dubrava, a modest village in Altai Krai. Growing up, he appeared to be an ordinary boy, part of a stable family, and by all accounts, he was an average teenager. Teachers and neighbors described him as quiet, disciplined, and polite, a boy who blended into the background but never caused trouble. He was intelligent, diligent in his studies, and socially well-behaved, earning the respect of those around him, though no one could have guessed the dark turn his life would later take. After finishing school in the early 1990s, Manishin enrolled at Altai State University's Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, where he pursued his studies diligently. By the mid-1990s, he had secured a position as the chief veterinarian at the Shadrinskoy Company. But his ambitions did not stop at medicine. He also became deeply involved in local politics. First, he became head of the village council in Shadrino, and later he served as the deputy head of Kalmansky District Administration until March 2023. Outwardly, he was a man of success, respected, intelligent, disciplined, and deeply involved in his community. Married twice, his life appeared ordinary, respectable, even enviable. By 2013, his public image had solidified. A local newspaper, Zaria Priobia, described him as a man who cared deeply for his constituents, someone who knew the older residents by name, who appeared approachable and trustworthy. Everyone in the village knew him as capable and intelligent, and yet beneath this facade, a secret darkness was quietly growing. The first cracks in his perfect image began in 1989, when 17-year-old Ludmila Abedina disappeared from Zelianaya Dubrava. Her body would not be discovered until September 1990, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. After this initial crime, Manishin appeared to fade back into normal life, seemingly ceasing any violent acts for nearly a decade. But the pattern would return, more organized, more chilling. In June 1998, 18-year-old Yana Shalamova vanished while applying to Altai State Pedagogical University. Her body was found floating in the Ob River a week later, strangled to death. Barely 10 days later, another university applicant, Galina Durina, disappeared, only to be discovered a month later with her body buried in the forest, her injuries suggesting a sharp object had been used. Though Manishin was not officially linked at the time, these early crimes marked the beginnings of a methodical and sinister pattern, targeting young women, often students, using their trust against them. By the summer of 1999, the scope of disappearances widened. For young women disappeared from Barnaul, all connected to university studies. Among them was Kadura Orzhak, Svetlana Filipchenko, Natalia Berdysheva, and Svetlana Oparina. Each disappearance sent waves of fear through the community, yet no one suspected the quiet, intelligent deputy veterinarian and respected political figure as the man behind these heinous acts. From June to August 2000, a string of disappearances shocked Barnaul. 5 female students vanished: Yulia Tektiva, Liliana Wozniak, Olga Shmakova, Angela Berdikova, and Ksenia Kirgizova, all last seen on university grounds. In addition, Elena Anisimova, Valentina Mihalyukova, and Nina Shakarova disappeared during the same period. Fear gripped the community as parents warned their children, and rumors of a predator circulated quietly through the city. Witnesses reported meeting a man, well-dressed, seemingly helpful, offering assistance with university admissions. He was described as being between 40 and 45, with dark, messy hair and a polite demeanor. The public saw a kind, helpful figure, the kind who could easily hide malevolent intentions behind a charming smile. Unbeknownst to them, this man was luring students into his deadly trap, using trust and authority as weapons. Authorities launched a massive investigation. Over 35,000 people were interviewed: students, teachers, university staff, and locals. Composite sketches were distributed. 71 photographs of applicants and visitors to the universities were examined. Even vehicles in nearby parking lots were checked. Yet, despite the immense effort, no arrest was made, and the disappearances continued. On September 4th, near the village of Yuzhny along the Barno-Rubtsovsk highway, torn clothes, a notebook, a certificate, and a map belonging to Ksenia Kirgizova were discovered in the forest. A search of the area revealed 5 fresh graves in the local cemetery, but to the shock of investigators, they were empty. It seemed the killer was always one step ahead, carefully hiding evidence, meticulously planning his actions to avoid capture. By early October, skeletal remains of several victims were found near Buranovo, including Angela Burdakova. Subsequent examinations identified Kirgizova, Mihalyukova, Shakarova, and Operina. Years later, Shmakova, Tektiva, and Wozniak's remains were recovered, completing the grim puzzle of the Barnaul maniac's victims. Psychiatrists attempting to profile the killer suggested he was a middle-aged man, married, with children, and a job that allowed him freedom to disappear for days at a time. By September 2000, investigators thought they might have a lead. A student at Altai State Technical University reported recognizing a man she had seen multiple times during the exam period. He introduced himself as a dean from the Faculty of Economics and offered help with admissions. The man was identified as Alexander Anisimov, a 45-year-old married man with 3 children and a VAZ 2109 car. He had a criminal record for hooliganism and theft, but no previous violent crimes. To the public, he seemed ordinary, friendly, sociable, and approachable, but suspicion cast a shadow over his life. Anisimov was placed under surveillance, and when police searched his apartment, they discovered axes, knives, a shotgun, a hunting rifle, bullets, and handcuffs. He denied ever visiting the university grounds, but 11 students confirmed that he had offered them help with admissions. 3 days later, under pressure, he confessed to murdering 5 girls, claiming robbery as his motive. But even with his confession, the investigation had lingering doubts, and the case seemed far from resolved. The investigation took an unexpected turn in May 2023. Russian media reported that 52-year-old Vitaly Manishin had been arrested for the murder of Lyudmila Abedina, the first known victim from 1989. At the time of his arrest, Manishin was deputy head of the Kalmansky District Administration and served on several municipal committees. Outwardly respectable, he seemed to be the last person anyone would suspect. During interrogations, Manishin unexpectedly confessed, not only to Lyudmila's murder, but also to killing 5 students in Barnaul between June and August 2000. He admitted to exploiting his position as a veterinarian and farm director to gain the trust of young women, offering help with university admissions as a ruse to lure them into his deadly plan. Under pressure, he accidentally implicated himself in 4 additional murders from 1999 to 2000, including Valentina Mihalyukova, a confirmed victim of the Barnaul maniac. This revelation shocked the nation. The man known for intelligence, discipline, and civic duty, the respected politician, the caring community member, was the true architect of a string of chilling murders spanning decades. What drove Vitaly Manishin to commit such heinous acts? Psychologists who studied the case suggested a man who hid his deviant impulses behind a mask of normality. By day, he was a public servant, a politician, a family man, a veterinarian, someone who commanded trust and respect. By night, he transformed into a predator, meticulous in planning and patient in execution. His strategy was cold and calculated. Each victim was chosen carefully, often young women seeking higher education. Using his position of authority and charm, he convinced them he could help, creating an illusion of safety and trust. He exploited ordinary opportunities, exam periods, university admission cycles, and social familiarity to camouflage his actions. To investigators and the public, he appeared perfectly normal, a fact that allowed him to evade suspicion for decades. The revelations shattered the community. Families of the victims were devastated, left grappling with grief, anger, and confusion. Parents who had trusted the safety of their children were forced to confront a nightmare reality. The person responsible was a man who had blended seamlessly into society, hiding his monstrous acts behind respectability and charm. Victims' families described a sense of betrayal that compounded their sorrow. The fact that the killer had once been a seemingly good member of the community made the trauma even deeper. Friends, neighbors, and colleagues struggled to reconcile their memories of a helpful, intelligent man with the horror of his confessed crimes. Vitaly Manishin's trial began in 2024, drawing national attention. Evidence, confessions, and witness testimonies painted a chilling portrait of premeditated cruelty. After a lengthy legal process, on October 1st, 2025, the Kalmansky District Court convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison, with the first 7 to be served in a strict regime penal colony. The relatively lenient sentence reflected the expiration of statutes of limitations on most of his murders. But for the victims' families, the conviction provided at least a partial sense of closure. Even after his sentencing, the shadow of doubt and horror lingered. Many questioned whether all of his crimes had been uncovered, while others reflected on the terrifying truth that monsters often hide in plain sight, wearing masks of normalcy. Vitaly Manishin's story is a stark reminder of the dangers that can hide behind ordinary faces and respected positions. It forces us to question our assumptions, to recognize warning signs, and to remain vigilant for the safety of our communities. In the quiet towns, bustling universities, and everyday workplaces, darkness can exist where we least expect it. As you reflect on this case, consider the importance of awareness, communication, and caution. Share this story to honor the victims, educate others, and ensure that such tragedies are never forgotten. The lives of Lyudmila Abedina, Yana Shalamova, Galina Durina, and all the victims lost to Vitaly Manishin must serve as a lasting warning, a testament to the need for vigilance, justice, and compassion in a world where evil can hide behind the most ordinary faces. Case 2. It was a seemingly peaceful town in New South Wales, a place where neighbors greeted each other on the street and families ran businesses passed down through generations. Yet beneath the calm facade, Griffith was quietly being taken over by a ruthless criminal underworld, one fueled by the illegal drug trade and shadowed by fear. On July 15, 1977, Donald McKay, a man known for his courage and integrity, would vanish without a trace from a hotel car park. The evidence left behind, bloodstains, drag marks, and spent bullets, told a story of violent struggle, intimidation, and premeditated murder. His disappearance would send shockwaves across Australia, exposing the deadly reach of organized crime and the dangerous cost of speaking the truth. Donald McKay was more than just a furniture store owner in Griffith. Born in Griffith but raised in Sydney, he was a man of principle, someone who valued family, community, and honesty. He married Barbara, a devoted member of the Uniting Church and a part-time physiotherapist. Together, they had 4 children, Paul, Ruth, Mary, and James, who grew up in a home filled with love and warmth. The McKay family ran McKay's Furniture, a well-known local business that provided livelihoods and a sense of community in Griffith. The store represented their hard work, their roots, and their place in the town's heart. Yet, Donald was not content to simply live a quiet life. He was deeply concerned about the moral decay spreading in his town, particularly the rapid growth of the illegal drug trade. He became politically active, standing as a Liberal Party candidate in multiple elections, including the 1974 House of Representatives contest against Al Grasby. Though he lost, his actions revealed a man willing to stand against corruption, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. Donald's brave whistleblowing would make him a target. In the early 1970s, he alerted the Sydney Drug Squad about a large marijuana crop in nearby Coleambally. His tips led to arrests and convictions, identifying him publicly as the man who had exposed the criminals. This act of integrity, while noble, made him enemies who were willing to kill to protect their empire. Suspicious incidents soon followed. A mysterious Mr. Adams contacted McKay, pretending to place a large furniture order. Sensing danger, McKay sent his employee Bruce Pursehouse instead. Adams never appeared, and Pursehouse later identified a man he had seen in Jerilderie as connected to the murder plot. It was a subtle but chilling warning. McKay was being watched, tested, and lured into danger, and someone wanted him silenced. On the night of July 15th, 1977, Donald McKay went out for drinks with friends, enjoying what seemed like a normal evening. Yet, by the end of that night, he would be gone. He disappeared from a hotel car park, leaving behind a scene that would haunt investigators for decades. His blood was found smeared across the ground and his van, car keys lying beneath the vehicle as if dropped in a struggle. Drag marks suggested he had been forcefully removed, and hairs found nearby hinted at a violent confrontation. 3 spent .22 caliber cartridges suggested the precise, cold execution of a plan. The town that had once felt safe suddenly became a place of fear and suspicion. The investigation was immediate but complicated. 6 men quickly emerged as potential suspects, all with seemingly airtight alibis. Tony and Dominic Sergi were on a pub crawl with police officers. Giuseppe and Rocco Barbaro were in Sydney and on the Gold Coast. Francesco Barbaro stayed at the local club. Robert Trimbley dined in Randwick. At first glance, the suspects appeared untouchable. Yet detectives, led by James Bindon, suspected Trimbley, a man with a known history of death threats against McKay. The investigation exposed Griffith as a town riddled with mobsters, criminal networks, and corruption. Far from the quiet streets it appeared to be. The murder was more than a local tragedy. It was the work of a powerful criminal organization. The Woodward Royal Commission, established by Premier Neville Wran, revealed that McKay had been murdered on orders from the Honored Society, a Griffith cell of the Calabrian Drangheta. Justice Philip Woodward identified the perpetrators: Francesco Sergi, Dominic Sergi, Antonio Sergi, Francesco Barbaro, and Robert Trimbley. Their reach, influence, and ability to evade justice made the case a symbol of the power of organized crime in Australia. Further shocking revelations came in 1983 when Gianfranco Tizzone turned informer. He admitted to arranging the contract and named James Frederick Basley, known only as Fred, as the hitman. Basley later denied being the shooter and tried to implicate corrupt police officers, but he was eventually convicted for his role in McKay's murder and sentenced to life in prison. For Barbara McKay and her children, the loss was devastating. Their lives, once secure and ordinary, were thrown into chaos. Grief, fear, and the long shadow of organized crime permeated their days. The murder also shook the community of Griffith, forcing residents to confront the presence of a criminal underworld that had operated in plain sight for years. The courage of Donald McKay, who refused to remain silent despite knowing the risks, became a stark reminder of the human cost of standing up to powerful criminals. Donald McKay's legacy lives on, not just in the hearts of his family, but in the fight against organized crime. In 1987, the Donald McKay Churchill Fellowship was created, awarding journalists and detectives opportunities to study organized crime investigation. In 2008, the Rotary Club of Griffith erected a marble bust of McKay in Banna Avenue, inscribed with the words, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Even decades later, the town remembers the man who risked everything to speak the truth. His courage continues to inspire, serving as a reminder that standing against crime and corruption comes with great risk, but also enduring honor. Donald Mackay's disappearance remains one of Australia's most haunting true crime cases. His body was never recovered, but his story exposes a chilling reality. In small towns, dangerous networks can flourish unnoticed, and speaking the truth can come with deadly consequences. Mackay's life and death remind us that courage and integrity are not without cost, but they're also the only weapons that can confront evil, even in its most hidden and powerful forms. Case 3: the quiet coastal town of Carnarvon in Western Australia, known for its sweeping beaches and remote campsites, became the scene of a mystery that would grip an entire nation. On the evening of October 15th, 2021, 4-year-old Cleo Smith and her family set out for a weekend getaway at the Blowholes campsite in McLeod, approximately 80 kilometers north of Carnarvon. It was meant to be a simple, joyful family trip, just the kind of escape that so many look forward to. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, none of them could have imagined that this ordinary outing would soon descend into a nightmare that would rivet the entire country. Cleo lived with her mother Ellie, her stepfather Jake Glidden, and her older sister. According to Ellie, Cleo had gone to bed in their tent around 8 in the evening, a small child's nightly ritual of cuddles and bedtime stories. She had woken briefly in the middle of the night at 2:30 a.m., asking for a sip of water, a mundane request that seemed completely ordinary at the time. After returning to sleep, nobody suspected that within mere hours, her disappearance would ignite one of the largest manhunts in Western Australian history. By 6 o'clock the following morning, when the family awoke, the tent revealed a chilling reality. Cleo and her sleeping bag were gone. The tent's zipper had been opened only about 30 centimeters from fully open, a subtle detail that would later become crucial in understanding the crime. The initial search by the family was frantic but brief. When it became clear that Cleo was not anywhere nearby, they called the police at 6:23 a.m. A patrol car was dispatched within 7 minutes, arriving on the scene at 7:10 a.m. as an anxious morning unfolded into a desperate search. Helicopters, police dogs, and ground teams scoured the area from air, land, and sea, combing through every possible hiding place. Ellie later stated, "She would never leave us. She would never leave the tent." Her words heavy with both fear and certainty, emphasizing the incomprehensibility of what had occurred. Initially, authorities treated the case as a search and rescue operation, hesitant to declare an abduction. Acting Deputy Commissioner Daryl Gaunt clarified that the investigation's primary focus was locating the missing girl safely. Yet suspicions mounted as Inspector John Monday noted that the zipper of Cleo's tent was positioned higher than a child her age could have reached alone. Every tiny detail, the distance of the zipper pull, the disturbed sleeping bag, hinted at the grim possibility that someone else was involved. By October 21st, law enforcement officially leaned toward an abduction theory, and Premier Mark McGowan announced a $1 million reward for any information leading to Cleo's safe return, prompting a media frenzy and even drawing bounty hunters to Carnarvon. The Western Australian Police Force, in collaboration with the Australian Federal Police, launched Task Force Radia, mobilizing over 100 officers under the leadership of Superintendent Rod Wild. With the COVID-19 pandemic imposing strict border controls across the nation, authorities considered the likelihood of Cleo being taken out of state to be low. Yet every lead was pursued with relentless urgency, from sighted vehicles to potential witnesses along the vast, open highways of Western Australia. Weeks of tension finally broke on November 3rd, 2021. In a moment of relief and jubilation, police found Cleo alive and unharmed inside a locked house just minutes from her family's home in Carnarvon. Terrence Darrell Kelly, a 36-year-old local man, was taken into custody after a car he was driving was stopped. Police had acted on critical forensic leads and a key sighting of a vehicle leaving the campsite in the early hours after Cleo's disappearance. When Ellie reunited with her daughter at the Carnarvon hospital, she noticed that Cleo's hair had been cut and dyed, a small but telling indication of her time in captivity. The day was described by Police Commissioner Chris Dawson as one of the most remarkable days in policing in Western Australia, a statement that captured the collective relief and astonishment of the community. The emotional impact of Cleo's return reverberated across Australia and the world. Families, neighbors, and even strangers shared in the relief, as Dawson himself was reported to have broken down in tears upon hearing the news. Associate Professor Xanthi Mallet of the University of Newcastle noted that such a recovery was extremely rare in cases of child abduction, highlighting the unusual and fortunate outcome of this terrifying ordeal. As the investigation turned toward prosecution, Terrence Kelly faced serious charges. He was charged with forcibly taking a child under 16 and obstructing police officers. Prior to his arrest, Kelly had a troubled background. Raised in a violent household with parents who struggled with alcohol, he had been in child protection care, diagnosed with ADHD and oppositional defiant disorder, and had a history of suicidal ideation and antisocial behavior. His adult life was marked by criminal activity, including burglary, and he had a fixation on children and dolls, as well as a distorted fantasy of fatherhood. Psychiatrists described him as severely fragile, disturbed, and fragmented, with a complex combination of personality disorders, schizophrenia, PTSD, depression, and anxiety. Despite living in the same town as Cleo, Kelly had no connection to the Smith family. Neighbors described him as quiet and odd, yet he was not on anyone's radar as a potential threat. The abduction, police later explained, was opportunistic. Kelly's arrest and the meticulous police investigation that followed led to a 13.5-year prison sentence, with eligibility for parole after 11.5 years. Appeals to reduce the sentence were denied, ensuring justice was served for Cleo and her family. Cleo's story became a symbol of hope and vigilance. It showcased the importance of attention to small details, the persistence of law enforcement, and the resilience of a community shaken by fear, but ultimately united by relief. The combination of forensic evidence, timely public tips, and methodical police work demonstrated that even in the darkest of situations, hope can prevail. For Cleo, the terrifying ordeal ended not in tragedy, but in reunion, a reminder of the fragility of childhood and the courage of those who fight to protect it. Case for the streets of Ekaterinburg were still frozen in the lingering chill of early spring when a predator began walking among the crowds unnoticed. He was not someone who stood out. He was not powerful, wealthy, or respected. In fact, those who crossed his path would have likely dismissed him as insignificant. But beneath the surface of quiet humiliation and resentment, something darker had already begun to grow. By the time the city realized what was happening, 4 women would be dead, 2 more would barely escape with their lives, and an entire community would be living in fear of a man no one had truly seen. Very little is known about Aytuganov's childhood in the former Tajik Soviet Socialist Republic. Those who later tried to understand him described a man who had always felt like an outsider, socially awkward, academically unsuccessful, and painfully aware of his failures. He struggled in school and never completed his education. Relationships eluded him. He reportedly failed to find companionship, failed to build confidence, failed to secure any meaningful direction. Over time, rejection hardened into bitterness. The world, in his mind, had denied him something he believed he deserved. In early 2011, desperate for change and opportunity, he made a decision that would alter many lives forever. He illegally crossed into Russia and settled in the industrial city of Ekaterinburg. But the fresh start he imagined never materialized. He could not speak Russian fluently. Employers turned him away again and again. Without proper documents, he was unable to secure official work. Eventually, he found under-the-table employment as a parking lot security guard. The job offered little money, no stability, and no dignity. He remained unregistered, invisible to the system, existing in the shadows of a city that did not welcome him. The pressures mounted quickly. Financial stress, loneliness, cultural isolation, and humiliation began feeding an internal storm. Instead of seeking help, instead of leaving, Instead of adapting, he chose another path. According to investigators later, this was the moment where resentment turned into violence. He began to see strangers not as people, but as targets. On the night of March 27, 2011, his rage found its first victim. 32-year-old Marina Alexandrovna was walking home after visiting friends. It was an ordinary evening. The streets were quiet. She likely felt safe in her own neighborhood. She never knew she was being watched. Etuganov noticed her and began following at a distance, waiting for the right moment. When the opportunity presented itself, he attacked. He overpowered her, dragged her into an abandoned building nearby, and there committed a brutal assault before strangling her to death. Afterward, he searched through her belongings, taking her money and valuables as if the theft justified what he had done. Days later, her body was discovered. The city was horrified, but at that point, police had no clear suspect. Instead of stopping, he escalated. Over the next 3 months, 3 more women were attacked in similar fashion across the Leninsky city and Kolovsky districts. The pattern became terrifyingly clear. Women walking alone, isolated areas, sudden ambushes. Each victim was stalked beforehand. Each was robbed. Most were strangled. One was killed with a brick when he altered his method in what investigators later believed was either panic or experimentation. Fear spread rapidly through Ekaterinburg. Rumors of a serial attacker gripped neighborhoods. Women began traveling in groups. Families warned daughters not to walk alone after dark. But violence rarely remains perfect, and predators often grow careless. 2 additional women were attacked, but survived. The first endured a sexual assault and robbery, yet managed to escape. In her panic, she left behind her handbag, containing an expensive phone and 15,000 rubles. The attacker went into hiding for several days, sensing police pressure closing in. But the compulsion returned. He attempted another assault, targeting a different woman. This time, she fought back fiercely. In the struggle, she lost her phone, but she survived. And most importantly, she saw him clearly enough to describe him. Her testimony changed everything. Law enforcement, already investigating the pattern of murders, now had a description and physical evidence. When Etuganov was finally detained, forensic testing sealed his fate. His DNA matched evidence collected from 4 murder scenes and the 2 surviving victims. The Invisible Man had left traces after all. During trial proceedings, it became clear just how disconnected he remained from the society he had entered. He required an interpreter in Tajik because he could not speak Russian well enough to understand the charges being read against him. The courtroom heard evidence tying him directly to the crimes. Additional suspected assaults were considered but dropped due to lack of sufficient proof. Still, the 4 murders and 2 attacks were undeniable. On June 1, 2011, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. The sentence, life imprisonment. Witnesses reported that upon hearing the judgment, Etuganov broke down in tears. Whether those tears were for himself, for lost freedom, or for genuine remorse remains unknown. What is known is that he was transferred to the infamous Polar colony, one of Russia's most severe penal institutions, reserved for the country's most dangerous offenders. There, under constant surveillance and isolation, he would spend the remainder of his life. Appeals to the Supreme Court of Russia were filed, but each was denied. For the families of the victims, no sentence could restore what was taken. For women left homes that day and never returned. Parents buried daughters. Friends replayed final conversations in their minds. Survivors carried invisible scars that would outlast headlines and court dates. In the end, the story of Etuganov is not one of mystery, but of warning. A man who felt invisible chose violence as a solution to humiliation. A city learned how quickly ordinary streets can become hunting grounds. And behind the legal documents and prison walls remain the names and faces of women whose lives were stolen. Not by fate, but by deliberate choice. Some monsters announce themselves loudly. Others walk quietly beside you, waiting. Case 5 in the quiet town of Gagarin. Life moved slowly, predictably, and most people never imagined that darkness could grow so close to home. Andrei Bolgarov was born and raised there. a boy who drifted through school without direction, his days defined by boredom and frustration rather than achievement. By the ninth grade, the weight of failure was undeniable, and he left school entirely, a young man without skills, without work, without ambition, and entirely dependent on his parents. But beneath the surface of this ordinary life, something far more dangerous was quietly forming. At just 16, the simmering frustration inside him erupted into violence, claiming the lives of 2 women and landing him in prison for several years. For most, prison might have been a turning point, a place to reflect, to change, to grow. For Bolgarov, it was time to plan, to wait, to learn patience. When he was released on parole in April 2010, he returned to the familiar streets of Gagarin, settling with a woman he had met while behind bars. To her, he was affectionate, playful, even kind, a man she lovingly called Kot, a name that suggested warmth and trust. She never imagined that behind those gentle gestures and quiet smiles, he had begun weaving a hidden world online. On Odnoklassniki, he created multiple fake identities, each crafted with precision, each designed to appeal to a lonely heart or a vulnerable young woman. He contacted girls under different names, chatting, charming, studying their lives, learning their weaknesses, and patiently drawing them in. 2 of them would respond, stepping unknowingly into his orbit, becoming the victims of a man who had already learned once how to take life, and who now moved with calm calculation, concealing his monstrous side behind a mask of ordinary affection. Evgenia Shamrock was 30 years old, a quiet presence in the streets of Gagarin, known to friends and neighbors as thoughtful and cultured, a woman whose life revolved around her love for books and her work at the local library. She had graduated from the Institute of Arts and carried herself with the calm confidence of someone who valued intelligence and creativity, yet behind her gentle demeanor lay a hopefulness, a quiet longing for connection that had brought her online in search of companionship. It was there, among the endless scrolls of profiles and messages, that she encountered Andrei Bolgarov, a man whose charm and attentiveness slowly drew her in, a presence that seemed to understand her in ways she had longed for. Their conversations grew frequent, flowing naturally across Skype calls, gradually shifting to exchanging mobile numbers, building a fragile bridge of trust and familiarity. Then, on July 8, 2010, she invited him in her home, opening her door to a stranger who arrived impeccably dressed in a neat suit, holding a bouquet of flowers that seemed at once romantic and harmless, the kind of gesture that made him appear ordinary, even kind. A small moment of human error, knocking on the wrong apartment first, only deepened the illusion of normalcy, making him seem more awkward than threatening. They walked together through the quiet streets of the city, talking and laughing lightly, savoring the simplicity of companionship, before returning to Bolgarov's apartment, where they shared wine and conversation, the hours slipping by unnoticed. As midnight approached, he offered to walk her back to her house. A gesture of courtesy she accepted without hesitation, never suspecting that behind his calm demeanor lay a calculating gaze. Inside her apartment, as she moved about casually, searching the cupboards for tea, he noticed a nylon cord lying on a shelf, a small object that would, in the coming moments, become the instrument of unimaginable violence, though at that time, nothing in the room hinted at the horror that was about to unfold. Without warning, the polite, charming man who had spent the evening walking and laughing with Evgenia Shamrock transformed into a predator, his calm exterior cracking to reveal the cold precision beneath. He grabbed her with swift force, restraining her as she struggled in confusion and fear, and moved her into a nearby closet, a confined space where panic would have clawed at her chest while he methodically carried out his plan. Strangulation is intimate and deliberate, a slow, suffocating act that left no room for error, and once he had silenced her completely, Bolgarov paused only long enough to ensure she was dead, the finality of the moment sinking into the quiet apartment. With the life he had taken confirmed, he turned to the task of erasing her existence from both his world and hers. He rifled through her belongings, taking her purse, her jewelry, her mobile phone, and even the bouquet he had given her earlier, a grotesque reclamation of the illusion of romance he had so carefully crafted. As a final act, he poured flammable liquid onto the sofa and armchair, setting them ablaze to disguise his crime and create a scene of chaos while he walked out calmly, leaving the fire to consume what remained. Outside, he emptied the purse, taking the 2,000 rubles inside, discarding it carelessly beside the road, and then made his way to a pawn shop where he sold her phone for a paltry 700 rubles, yet kept her bracelet, a small token of his possession and control. Even after such a horrific act, he returned home without hesitation, resuming his digital life as though nothing had happened, contacting other women, creating new conversations, and within days another unsuspecting woman responded, stepping unknowingly into the orbit of a man whose charm masked a calculating, lethal darkness. Anastasia Nastia Lukyanova, just 21, was a college student and cook living in Smolensk, a kind and shy young woman whose gentle demeanor masked a vulnerability she carried quietly, one shaped by insecurities about her appearance and a longing to be loved for exactly who she was. She craved connection, someone who would see past her self-doubt and accept her completely. And in the anonymity of the internet, she believed she had found that person in Andrei, a supposed programmer from Gagarin, whose messages and attention made her feel noticed, special, and desired. Her family and colleagues noticed the subtle change in her behavior, the brightness in her voice when she spoke of him, the way she seemed to carry herself differently. But they were also puzzled by her secrecy, especially the fact that, at his insistence, she never shared a single photograph of him with anyone, a detail that seemed odd but harmless in the romance of new love. Taking advantage of her parents' absence and the fact that her grandmother lived far away in the countryside, Anastasia invited this man into her home on the evening of July 14th, trusting in the bond they had built online. He arrived as promised, calm, collected, and seemingly ordinary, and they went to her room, where they spoke and laughed quietly for about 20 minutes, the conversation flowing naturally, the ordinary warmth of intimacy disguising the danger that lurked only a few feet away. Then, with no warning and no argument, the charm vanished. He asked her for money, and when she explained that she had none, his demeanor shifted instantly into one of deadly calculation. He grabbed a belt from her clothing, looping it with precision around her neck, and within moments, Anastasia's life was extinguished, the room silent, but for the finality of the act. In the aftermath, he methodically searched through her home, taking every valuable item he could find, her phone, her camera, some gold, though he was ultimately unable to locate any cash. Not a trace of panic or remorse marked his actions. Once satisfied, he called a taxi and returned to Gagarin, leaving the driver a tip of 500 rubles as casually as one might tip for service, blending back into ordinary life as if nothing had occurred, while the bright, vulnerable young woman he had lured into trust lay lifeless, a victim of his calculated, remorseless cruelty. By the time Anastasia Lukianova's body was discovered, a shadow of fear had already settled over the community, whispers spreading through Gagarin and Smolensk that a predator might be on the loose, a man who struck quietly, leaving devastation in his wake, and authorities quickly realized the urgency of the situation. Launching interviews with everyone who might hold a clue, neighbors, friends, and colleagues were questioned, including Shamrock's next-door neighbor who had noticed the suspicious young man lingering around, and the taxi driver who had unknowingly transported Bolgarov from Smolensk after the second murder, both of whom painted a portrait of a man who appeared ordinary, almost harmless, but whose presence had left a lingering sense of unease. Using these witness accounts and the mounting evidence from the crimes themselves, law enforcement tracked the trail directly to Bolgarov's doorstep. And in a quiet but deliberate arrest, they took him into custody on charges of murdering both Shamrock and Lukyanova, a moment that would finally bring the horror of his calculated spree into the public eye. In a move that seemed almost pragmatic, knowing that cooperation might influence the court's judgment, Bolgarov confessed readily, his words delivered without visible remorse, yet with the chilling calmness of someone fully aware of his actions. The trial moved forward with the weight of the crimes pressing down on every detail, and the court, acknowledging both the severity of the murders and the mitigating circumstances surrounding his life, convicted him of both killings, sentencing him to 25 years in prison, with the first 8 to be served in a standard facility before being transferred to a maximum security colony, a sentence designed to balance justice with a legal framework in place. On top of the prison term, he was ordered to pay 219,000 rubles in material damages to the families of his victims, a figure that could never compensate for the lives lost, but served as a formal acknowledgement of the harm he had inflicted. The families, devastated and enraged, protested the sentence, even going so far as to petition then-President Dmitry Medvedev to lift the country's moratorium on the death penalty, their pleas echoing the anger and grief that could not be assuaged by legal procedure. Yet their requests went unanswered, leaving them to bear the unhealed scars of loss and the haunting knowledge that the man responsible for destroying their daughter's lives would live on, confined but unbroken. Case 6, it was the morning of December 31st, 2000, when Haruko, Yasuko Miyazawa's mother, arrived at her daughter's home in the quiet Kemiso-Shigeya neighborhood of Setagaya, a peaceful suburb on the western edge of Tokyo, expecting perhaps a normal end-of-year visit, only to be confronted with a scene so horrific it would haunt the community for decades. Inside the house, the lifeless bodies of her daughter Yasuko, her husband Mikio, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Nina and 6-year-old Rei, lay scattered, each a silent testament to an unspeakable act of violence. Mikio and Yasuko had been brutally stabbed to death, as had Nina, while little Rei's life had been extinguished through strangulation, a method that spoke of chilling deliberation and cruelty. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department arrived swiftly, combing through the house with meticulous care, each corner revealing the shocking evidence that the murders had not been a random act, but a carefully executed crime carried out in the late hours of December 30th into the early moments of December 31st, roughly between 11:30 p.m. and 12:05 a.m. The air of the house thick with the residual fear and struggle of the victim's final moments. What made the crime even more terrifying was the realization that the killer had not fled immediately, but remained inside the home for several hours, moving among the bodies with cold calculation, a predator comfortable in the aftermath of his destruction. Takeshi Tsuchida, the chief of the Seiho police station at the time, took command of the investigation, his mind racing to piece together a puzzle of violence that seemed almost impossible to comprehend, a case that would test every skill of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police and leave an indelible mark on all who were involved in uncovering the truth behind the Miyazawa family massacre. Investigators later pieced together a chilling sequence of events that suggested the killer had entered the Miyazawa home through the second-floor bathroom window at the rear of the house, which overlooked the quiet expanse of Sashigaya Park. The fly screen was found lying on the ground outside, and footprints pressed into the mud nearby suggested that the intruder had climbed the fence and hoisted himself up onto the air conditioning unit to remove the screen before slipping inside, a method that spoke of careful planning and physical agility. Once inside, the killer found young Rei asleep in his room and, with bare hands, strangled him, extinguishing the child's life through asphyxiation while the rest of the house remained eerily silent, every moment heavy with impending horror. Some reports suggested that Mikio, the father, had rushed up from the first floor after detecting a disturbance in Rei's room, confronting the intruder in a desperate struggle that left him grievously injured, before being stabbed in the head with a sashimi bocho knife, a brutal strike so forceful that part of the blade allegedly broke off inside his skull. The violence did not stop there. The killer then turned on Yasuko and Nina, striking them with a broken blade before retrieving a Santoka knife from the home to complete their murders, each act deliberate, cold, and efficient, leaving the family's final moments filled with terror and helplessness. Decades later, in December 2019, investigators reported that the handkerchief used to wrap the knife bore similarities to certain practices in the Philippines, specifically in the Ilocos and Isabela regions, prompting the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department to consider sending officers there to explore whether the suspect had ties to the country, a haunting reminder that even 20 years later, the shadows of the crime continue to stretch far beyond the quiet streets of Setagaya, leaving a community desperate for answers and justice. After the murders, the killer lingered in the Miyazawa house for hours, moving through the family's home as though he were a guest in someone else's life, yet leaving behind a trail of chilling evidence that revealed both his audacity and cold detachment. During this time, he used the family computer, consumed 4 bottles of barley tea, sliced into a melon, and ate 4 ice creams from the refrigerator, tending to his own minor injuries with first aid kits and other sanitary supplies found in the home, even leaving his feces in the toilet without flushing, a grotesque mark of his presence. Some reports claimed he may have taken a nap on the sofa in the second-floor living room, though this could not be verified, leaving only speculation to fill the empty space where terror had reigned. Drawers were overturned, papers scattered, some even tossed into the bath and toilet, and a small amount of money was taken, though much of it remained untouched, suggesting that theft was incidental, secondary to the act of control and domination. Left behind in the living area were numerous items: a knife, a scarf, a hip bag, a shirt, a jacket, a hat, gloves, and 2 handkerchiefs, silent witnesses to his intrusion. Analysis of Mikio Miyazawa's computer revealed that it had connected to the internet briefly the morning after the murders, from 1:18 a.m. to 1:23 a.m., while various news outlets reported another connection around 10 a.m., the moment Haruko, Yasuko's mother, discovered the bodies. However, it was later clarified that this second connection was not made by the killer, but was triggered accidentally by Haruko, who, in her shock and distress, nudged the computer mouse while trying to process the horror before her eyes. In the lead-up to the murders, reports suggested the phone lines had been cut, isolating the family, though investigations later indicated this may not have occurred, leaving detectives with a hauntingly meticulous scene that offered both chilling insight into the killer's behavior and frustrating gaps that continued to confound authorities as they attempted to reconstruct the final hours of the Miyazawa family. As the investigation into the Miyazawa murders unfolded, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police began piecing together a series of extraordinarily specific clues, each detail painting an unsettling portrait of a meticulous and calculating killer. Yet no arrest or identification could be made, leaving the case shrouded in frustration and fear. From the killer's own actions, the authorities discovered that he had eaten string beans and sesame seeds the day before the murders, a small but telling trace uncovered from feces left in the family's bathroom, suggesting not only his diet, but his ability to leave behind forensic evidence in plain sight. The clothes and the sashimi knife he had abandoned had been purchased in Kanagawa Prefecture, a lead that offered the faintest hint of origin, yet no concrete path to apprehension. To broaden their net, the police launched what became known as Operation Roller, calling in anti-riot and public security officers to go door-to-door in the neighborhood, collecting fingerprints from locals in an effort to match them to the crime scene. Each knock on a door echoing the desperation to find the invisible intruder. Investigators traced his shirt to an extremely limited production run. Only 130 units had been made, but even tracking down the 12 buyers proved futile in narrowing the suspect pool. Small traces left behind told more strange stories. Sand discovered inside the hip bag at the scene was analyzed and linked both to a skate park in Japan and, in a baffling twist, to the Nevada desert near Edwards Air Force Base in California, hinting at movement or connections far beyond what anyone expected. His shoes, manufactured in South Korea but sold under the British brand Slazenger, added yet another layer of mystery. Each forensic breadcrumb confirming that the killer was at once ordinary in appearance yet extraordinarily deliberate, leaving behind objects and traces that seemed almost designed to taunt the investigators, a chilling game of cat and mouse that would stretch the limits of their patience and skill. On April 9, 2001, a Jizo statue was quietly placed along the banks of the Sengawa River, just west of the Miyazawa family residence, a somber and delicate gesture that appeared on the 100th day after the murders, carrying with it whispers and speculation that someone connected to the tragedy, or perhaps someone moved by grief, had placed it there an offering of remembrance, protection, or even silent guilt, standing as a haunting, spiritual marker near the site of unspeakable loss. Over a decade later, in December 2013, investigators turned to modern technology, employing 3D printing to create an exact replica of the Miyazawa home, a painstaking effort that allowed them to study the spatial dynamics of the crime, to reconstruct movements, and to simulate scenarios that might explain how the killer had operated with such audacious precision. Every corner and hallway rendered in miniature, but carrying the full weight of terror. And in a more recent breakthrough, on December 17, 2021, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department reported that advancements in visual identification technology had allowed them to pinpoint a person of interest who had purchased a knife identical to the one used in the murders, a moment that briefly raised hope in a case that had long gone cold. Yet, despite the promise of this lead, DNA testing revealed no match to the true perpetrator, ruling the individual out and underscoring the chilling reality that the Miyazawa family killer remained elusive, always one step ahead, leaving investigators to grapple with both cutting-edge tools and decades-old mystery in their relentless pursuit of justice. Forensic experts meticulously combed through the Miyazawa residence, uncovering the chilling trail left by the killer. Fingerprints pressed into the grime of drawers and countertops, DNA traces smeared across surfaces, every mark a silent signature of the perpetrator's presence. Yet none matched any existing police databases, revealing a person who had somehow remained invisible to the law until that night. A stranger without prior record, untouched by detection. From the analysis, detectives were able to form a physical profile. The killer was believed to be around 170 centimeters tall, with a thin but capable build, the kind of body required to climb fences, scale air conditioning units, and maneuver through the home with deadly efficiency. At the time of the murders, estimates placed his age anywhere between 15 and 35, though initial assumptions had allowed for a broader range of 15 to 40, reflecting the uncertainty of such a complex crime. And in 2018, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police refined the profile even further, suggesting a shockingly young age of 15 to 22, highlighting the remarkable physical agility and calculated composure of the offender. Examination of the wounds indicated he was likely right-handed, and blood analysis revealed traces of type A blood that did not belong to the Miyazawa family, a revelation that gave the first tangible insight into the killer himself. DNA testing of this blood painted an enigmatic portrait. The killer was male and potentially of mixed race, with maternal genetic markers suggesting a mother of European descent, likely from somewhere along the Mediterranean or Adriatic coasts, and paternal markers indicating an East Asian father, a combination that lent an almost exotic anonymity to his identity. A haunting reminder that the person responsible for extinguishing 4 lives in cold blood had walked into the house as an unknown entity, leaving nothing but fragments of evidence that teased investigators decades later with tantalizing but incomplete truths. Further analysis of the killer's DNA revealed an even more intricate and mysterious picture. While maternal markers initially suggested European heritage, investigators acknowledged the possibility that these genes could trace back to a distant ancestor rather than a fully European mother, a subtle clue that complicated the profile of the murderer and hinted at a lineage that spanned continents. Meanwhile, examination of the Y chromosome indicated haplogroup 122, a genetic signature common among East Asian populations, found in roughly 1 in 4 or 5 Koreans, 1 in 10 Chinese, and 1 in 13 Japanese, anchoring the killer's paternal line within a broad but discernible geographic range. Further reports in July 2025 even suggested the maternal ancestry might trace to the Caucasus region, deepening the international dimension of the case and prompting the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department to seek support from the International Criminal Police Organization, concerned that the perpetrator might not be Japanese or might have left the country, a chilling reminder that the individual responsible could be anywhere, moving freely while the world waited for justice. The investigation into the Miyazawa murders became one of the largest and most complex in Japanese history, involving over 246,000 officers and investigators who meticulously gathered more than 12,500 pieces of evidence, each fragment carefully cataloged and preserved. A testament to the determination to solve a crime that had left an entire nation shocked and grief-stricken. As of December 2021, a 20 million yen reward still stood for anyone providing information leading to the arrest of the killer, a symbol of both hope and desperation. While over the years, dedicated officers, 40 in 2015, 35 in 2019, continue to work full-time on the case, never allowing it to fade from memory. Every year, the TMPD conducts memorial ceremonies at the Miyazawa residence, honoring the lives lost and reinforcing the commitment to find the perpetrator. And Takashi Tsuchida, the original lead investigator, carried his dedication beyond active service by joining the non-profit Sora no Kai as a special advisor. A quiet but steadfast legacy of devotion to justice in a case that has haunted Japan for decades and remains unresolved, leaving the shadow of the Setagaya killer as both a mystery and a warning, lingering in the minds of investigators and the public alike. In 2015, the aftermath of the Setagaya murders extended beyond the crime scene, reaching into the realm of media and public perception, when an Irie, Yasuko, Miyazawa's older sister, filed a formal complaint with the Broadcast and Human Rights and other related rights committee of the Broadcasting Ethics and Program Improvement Organization, asserting that a 2014 TV Asahi documentary had misrepresented her family by promoting a theory, supported by a TV reporter and a former FBI agent using criminal profiling, that the killer had acted out of personal resentment toward the Miyazawas, a claim that she argued distorted the truth and unfairly cast shadows on her family's memory. Years later, in 2019, the TMPD announced that the Miyazawa house, the site of the brutal killings, would be torn down due to its age and structural instability, with interiors already showing signs of decay, though authorities reassured the public that the demolition would have no effect on the ongoing investigation, as all critical evidence had been carefully preserved. Still, the decision sparked appeals from family members and supporters who saw the house not just as a crime scene, but as a monument to the tragedy that had forever altered their lives. The case continued to captivate public attention in 2022, when Universal Audio and USG launched the podcast Faceless, a deep investigative exploration of the Setagaya murders, meticulously written and narrated by author Nicholas Obregon, who challenged many of the long-held assumptions about the crime, delving into the complex human and investigative elements of the case, including extensive interviews with former TMPD Chief Takashi Tsuchida and Setsuko Miyazawa, the grandmother of Nina and Rei, whose insights offered rare glimpses into the enduring pain, the unresolved questions, and the relentless search for answers that has kept the shadow of the Setagaya killer alive in both the public imagination and the hearts of those directly affected. Even decades after the tragedy, the shadow of the Miyazawa murders continued to stir unrest and vigilance in Setagaya, as evidenced on November 23, 2023, when 10 high school students reportedly broke into the grounds of the Miyazawa residence in a reckless test of courage, climbing over fences and wandering near the site of the brutal killings. Though they did not enter the house itself, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department responded swiftly, announcing that the minors would face prosecution under the Minor Offenses Act, while increasing foot patrols and erecting new no trespassing signs to deter further incursions, a stark reminder that the memory of that night still demanded respect and caution. Barely 2 weeks later, on December 9, 2023, the TMPD expanded its efforts to engage the public in the ongoing investigation, distributing flyers and informational materials at Saijagakume Station to appeal for any information related to the case, blending both awareness and a quiet plea for justice into the fabric of everyday life in the neighborhood. The following year, on May 27, 2024, the Setagaya Ward Assembly took a historic step by passing a motion urging Tokyo authorities to increase the use of DNA evidence in criminal investigations and promote its broader application. A push that culminated in December 2024 when a nonprofit organization, Sora, Nokai formally requested the creation of legislation to regulate and standardize DNA handling, highlighting the unique challenges in Japan where no national guidelines exist and the TMPD operates under the regulations of the National Public Safety Commission, a legal framework that underscored the painstaking complexity of pursuing truth in a case that remained unresolved despite decades of scrutiny, technological advances, and tireless dedication by law enforcement and advocates alike. Case 7 Helen Wingard Hill, a native of Columbia, South Carolina, grew up steeped in the rhythms and traditions of the American South, her roots anchored deeply in the city where her family had lived for generations. She carried the name of her grandmother, Helen Addison Wingard, a quiet homage woven into her identity by her mother Becky, a reminder of lineage, history, and home. From an early age, Hill displayed a remarkable creative spark, channeling her imagination into storytelling through film, picking up the camera at just 11 years old and crafting short animated pieces that revealed both her curiosity and her burgeoning technical skill. Inspired by a visit from the documentary filmmaker Stan Woodward to her 5th grade classroom, she produced a stop-motion Super 8 film she called The House of Sweet Magic, a whimsical yet meticulously crafted story of a toy dinosaur laying siege to a gingerbread house, all staged on a tabletop at home, reflecting both a childlike playfulness and a disciplined eye for composition. That same year, she joined forces with her classmates, under the guidance of Susan Leonard from the South Carolina Arts Commission and teacher Penelope Rawl, to produce another film as part of a statewide initiative that brought filmmaking into the classroom. The resulting piece, Quacks, was a lively live-action short with a separately recorded musical track, following a comical figure in a duck costume interacting with school children at their bus stop, a project that highlighted Hill's early aptitude for storytelling, her ability to collaborate, and the way she transformed ordinary moments into cinematic vignettes, setting the stage for a life intertwined with imagination, creativity, and the quiet persistence of a young artist discovering her voice. After completing her formative years in Columbia, Helen Hill's ambitions led her to Harvard University, where she pursued an A.B. in English with a minor in visual and environmental studies, a department that became her first formal introduction to filmmaking at a collegiate level. During her time there, she pushed the boundaries of her craft, creating the 16mm animated short Rain Dance in 1990, along with 2 other experimental animated films, each a delicate balance of technical mastery and inventive storytelling that hinted at the distinctive vision she would carry forward into her career. Following graduation in 1992, Hill and her Harvard classmate Paul Gillianis, initially a close friend, journeyed to New Orleans for the summer, drawn to the city's intoxicating mix of music, art, and progressive culture, a place where the streets themselves seemed alive with rhythm and color. Amid the jazz notes and bohemian energy, their friendship deepened into romance, blossoming into love that would culminate in their marriage in Columbia 2 years later. Hill's dedication to her craft continued as she pursued a Master's of Fine Arts at the California Institute of the Arts, honing her animation skills and developing a visual language that combined meticulous handcraft with bold creativity. Upon graduating in 1995, she followed Gillianis to Halifax, Nova Scotia, where he attended Dalhousie University Medical School, and she immersed herself in the city's artistic landscape, teaching animation at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and the Atlantic Filmmakers Cooperative, while simultaneously creating films that reflected both personal vision and the world around her. Settling in Halifax's culturally rich but economically struggling North End, Hill's experiences in this neighborhood would later inspire her poignant 2004 film Bohemian Town, a cinematic homage to the people, textures, and resilient spirit of a community that mirrored her own blend of artistry, empathy, and unflinching observation, establishing her as an artist whose work resonated deeply with both place and human experience. In December of 2000, Helen Hill and Paul Gillianis returned to New Orleans with their beloved cat, Nola, and their quirky pot-bellied pig, Rosie, settling into the vibrant mid-city district, a neighborhood alive with the pulse of music, street life, and creative energy that seemed to echo the rhythm of Hill's imagination. For years later, on October 15, 2004, the couple welcomed their son, Francis Pop, into a household already brimming with art, ideas, and a palpable sense of curiosity. Hill's dedication to nurturing creativity extended beyond her own work, as she continued to teach animation through the New Orleans Video Access Center and the New Orleans Film Collective, which she co-founded, fostering a new generation of storytellers while simultaneously expanding her own artistic repertoire. In August 2005, the city and Hill's world was violently altered by the catastrophic failures of the levees during Hurricane Katrina, which flooded their mid-city home along with roughly 80% of New Orleans, displacing the family and destroying most of their possessions. Temporarily relocating to Columbia, South Carolina, and living with family for a year, Hill's resilience and determination shone through as she orchestrated a heartfelt and imaginative campaign, rallying friends with postcards and letters to persuade her husband and herself to return to New Orleans in August 2006, refusing to abandon the city and its creative spirit. Back in New Orleans, she dove headlong into her work, producing films that reflected both personal narrative and the city's fractured yet unbroken heart, while engaging in grassroots activism aimed at rebuilding not just buildings but communities, particularly in the Faubourg-Marigny neighborhood, all while serving as a visiting artist and teacher at the New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, a role that allowed her to guide young artists even as she herself navigated the challenges of post-Katrina life, motherhood, and an unyielding commitment to the art of animation and the city she loved so fiercely. In the early hours of January 4th, 2007, as dawn barely touched the streets of the Faubourg-Marigny neighborhood in New Orleans, a quiet domestic scene turned into a nightmare when an unknown intruder forced his way into Helen Hill's home around 5:30 a.m. The violence was sudden and brutal. Hill was shot and killed, her husband Paul Galliena struck 3 times but miraculously surviving, and their toddler son left uninjured, a haunting testament to both the randomness and precision of the attack. Earlier that morning, the same intruder had attempted to rob a bed and breakfast just a few houses down the street, and police officers, already questioning the owners there, were thrown into chaos as the sound of gunfire ripped through Hill's home, shattering the fragile calm of the neighborhood and leaving a community in shock. In the years that followed, the New Orleans Police Department struggled to bring the perpetrator to justice, and as of 2018, no arrest had been made despite a $15,000 Crime Stoppers reward for information leading to an indictment, leaving the case unresolved and lingering in the public consciousness, amplified by extensive media coverage across national radio, television, and print in both the United States and Canada. Hill's death was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a larger wave of violence that gripped the city in the first week of 2007. Sparking civic outrage and culminating in a determined march on City Hall on January 11th, known as the March for Survival, where friends and fellow artists, including Helen Gillett, Ken Foster, and Beatty Landis, channeled grief into action, founding the nonprofit Silence is Violence, a campaign dedicated to peace and justice in New Orleans, ensuring that even in the wake of loss, Hill's legacy of creativity, resilience, and community would continue to inspire and mobilize those left behind. Helen Hill's filmmaking was a symphony of hands-on artistry, deeply rooted in the traditions of pioneers, yet fiercely individual in expression, drawing inspiration from the delicate two-dimensional silhouette puppets of Lotte Reiniger, while simultaneously embracing a vast array of techniques, from stop-motion and three-dimensional puppets to cell cycles and her own direct animation, where she would draw and scratch directly onto celluloid, leaving each frame a tactile imprint of her imagination. In the mid-1990s, she became captivated by do-it-yourself methods of filmmaking, immersing herself in hand processing, tinting, and toning her images entirely by hand, a painstaking process that made each film uniquely alive, textured, and intimate, and she honed these skills at Phil Hoffman's independent imaging retreat in Mount Forest, Ontario, in 1999 and 2000, refining the subtle craft that would define works such as Mouseholes, 1999, and Madam Winger Makes a Film, 2001. Beyond her own creations, Hill poured her energy into nurturing the broader filmmaking community, curating the Ladies Film Bee program at the 2000 Splice This Super 8 Film Festival in Toronto, compiling and editing the reference book recipes for disaster. A handcrafted film cookbooklet, which she updated in 2004 and 2006, and passionately advocating for do-it-yourself methods of archiving and restoring motion picture film, particularly in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Her dedication to preservation and education led her to speak at institutions such as CalArts and the University of South Carolina, sharing knowledge of DIY archiving techniques, while collaborating with moving image archivist Caravan Malson on the 2006 New York University master's thesis, Disaster Planning and Recovery, Post-Katrina Lessons from Mixed Media Collections, demonstrating how Hill's artistry was inseparable from her meticulous care for film as both craft and legacy, a tangible extension of her devotion to storytelling, community, and the enduring life of the moving image. Helen Hill's artistry did not go unnoticed, as her films earned acclaim at prestigious festivals, including the Ann Arbor Film Festival, where her inventive techniques and deeply personal storytelling captivated audiences and critics alike, reflecting a rare voice that blended technical mastery with profound emotional resonance. In 2004, her work was recognized with a Media Arts Fellowship grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, an award she channeled into the ambitious creation of the Florestan Collection, an animated film born from an extraordinary discovery. A heap of roughly 100 hand-sewn dresses found discarded in a New Orleans garbage pile in 2001. Drawing inspiration from these delicate remnants of lives past, Hill wove them into a cinematic tapestry, a labor of love that would later be completed by her husband, Paul Gilliunas, and close friends after her untimely death, eventually earning the Short Documentary Award at the 2011 Doxa Documentary Film Festival, a posthumous affirmation of her enduring vision. Helen Hill's artistry did not go unnoticed, as her films earned acclaim at prestigious festivals, including the Ann Arbor Film Festival, where her inventive techniques and deeply personal storytelling captivated audiences and critics alike, reflecting a rare voice that blended technical mastery with profound emotional resonance. In 2004, her work was recognized with a Media Arts Fellowship grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, an award she channeled into the ambitious creation of the Florestan Collection, an animated film born from an extraordinary discovery. A heap of roughly 100 hand-sewn dresses found discarded in a New Orleans garbage pile in 2001. Drawing inspiration from these delicate remnants of lives past, Hill wove them into a cinematic tapestry, a labor of love that would later be completed by her husband, Paul Gilliunas, and close friends after her untimely death, eventually earning the Short Documentary Award at the 2011 Doxa Documentary Film Festival, a posthumous affirmation of her enduring vision. Her influence extended beyond her films, and in 2008, the Robert Flaherty Film Seminar posthumously honored her with the Charles Samu Award, bestowed on animators whose work conveys universal messages illuminating our shared human experience, a fitting tribute to the way Hill's films bridged personal narrative and collective empathy. In March 2008, New York University paid tribute to Helen Hill's extraordinary life and work with Anywhere, a tribute to artist and activist Helen Hill, a carefully curated evening that showcased newly preserved films by and about her, opening the 6th Orphan Film Symposium in New York with a celebration of her creativity, activism, and singular vision. The event, co-presented by NYU's Department of Cinema Studies, the University of South Carolina Film Studies program, and the Nickelodeon Theater, also inaugurated the Helen Hill Awards, honoring filmmakers Naomi Yuman and Jimmy Kinder for creating works that reflected the spirit of Hill's artistry, her values, and the quiet intensity of her everyday passions. Hill's influence reached a historic milestone on December 30th, 2009, when the Librarian of Congress selected her 1995 Student Film Scratch and Crow for inclusion in the National Film Registry, a recognition reserved for films deemed aesthetically, historically, and culturally significant in American cinema. The library's statement praised the short for its vivid color, whimsical humor, and the poetic, spiritual homage it paid to animals and the human soul, capturing the essence of Hill's lifelong commitment to animation and storytelling. Further cementing her enduring legacy, scholar and major published Sweet Magic. The preservation of Helen Hill's cinema in the moving image in 2019, offering a comprehensive analysis of Hill's work, the meticulous preservation of her films, and the lasting impact of her inventive spirit on generations of animators, artists, and audiences who continue to be inspired by her handcrafted vision. Case 8 Jung's early life was marked by abandonment and isolation. Growing up in Busan under the care of her grandfather after her mother deserted her at just 1 year old and her father left when she was 6, leaving her to navigate the world largely on her own. By 2018, she had completed her secondary education but struggled to find direction, remaining unemployed and repeatedly applying to universities without success, while simultaneously preparing for competitive civil service examinations that demanded focus and discipline she found difficult to sustain. With so much idle time and a growing fascination with the darker corners of human behavior, Jung immersed herself in crime shows, murder stories, and online research, learning from the internet and library resources how killers disposed of bodies and executed their crimes, treating it almost as an academic pursuit. Her obsession evolved into meticulous planning, a chilling curiosity to translate theory into reality, as she honed her knowledge of criminal methods and honed her strategy for targeting vulnerable individuals. To find a suitable victim, she exploited her understanding of social vulnerabilities, creating a false identity as a parent on a tutoring app to approach unsuspecting female home tutors. By May 2023, she had contacted 54 tutors, presenting herself convincingly as the guardian of a 9th grade student in need of English lessons, systematically narrowing the field until she identified a 26-year-old freelance worker and university student living in southeastern Busan who responded to her fabricated scenario, unwittingly stepping into the web of a plan that Jung had spent months meticulously constructing, blending a facade of normalcy with the cold calculation of someone who had studied the art of murder as though it were a craft. Jung contacted the young female tutor and arranged a home lesson under the carefully constructed lie of being the mother of a 9th grade girl in need of English tutoring. And to perfect the illusion, she purchased a school uniform online, preparing every detail with unsettling precision. On May 26, 2023, disguised as a student and taking advantage of her naturally short stature, she arrived at the tutor's residence, appearing harmless and ordinary. The 26-year-old freelance worker and university student, seeing what seemed to be a shy schoolgirl at her door, welcomed her inside without suspicion. What followed was an eruption of calculated violence. Armed with a weapon she had prepared in advance, Jung attacked the tutor and stabbed her more than 110 times, the brutality reflecting not impulse but premeditated intent. Surveillance footage later revealed her chilling composure after the murder. She calmly returned to her own home to retrieve a black trolley suitcase, then stopped at a nearby store to purchase garbage bags and bleach, methodically gathering tools to erase the crime. Back at the victim's apartment, she dismembered the body and packed the remains into the suitcase, even severing the victim's fingers in an attempt to complicate biometric identification, while taking the woman's mobile phone, identification card, and wallet as part of her effort to stage what she envisioned as a traceless disappearance. What investigators would later describe as her attempt at committing a perfect crime. Before leaving, she removed the blood-stained school uniform and changed into the victim's clothes, blending back into the world outside, as if nothing had happened. She then hailed a taxi and traveled to a secluded wooded area near the Nakdong River in Yongsan, South Gyeongsang Province, where she abandoned the suitcase and its grim contents, believing she had meticulously covered her tracks, unaware that the very steps she had taken to conceal the murder would soon unravel into evidence leading investigators directly back to her. Suspicion first arose when the taxi driver, uneasy at the sight of the blood-streaked suitcase Jung had brought into his vehicle, alerted the authorities, setting in motion a rapid chain of events that would expose the meticulous crime. Police quickly located the abandoned suitcase in the secluded forest and were confronted with the grim reality of the dismembered body within. Acting swiftly, officers traced the evidence back to Young's residence, where they discovered not only the remaining body parts, but also the blood-stained clothing she had used during the murder, confirming her direct involvement. When questioned, Young exhibited an unsettling calm, initially offering contradictory statements, claiming at first that she had only moved the body after discovering the victim had been killed by someone else, and later suggesting that the death occurred accidentally during a dispute. The inconsistencies in her story drew immediate scrutiny from investigators, prompting her family to intervene and urge her to fully disclose the truth. Confronted with the mounting evidence and the imploring of those close to her, Young ultimately confessed to every detail of the murder, revealing the premeditation and cold calculation behind each act. On June 2nd, in a rare display of public acknowledgement, she issued an apology, claiming she had been out of her mind and expressing that she was really sorry for the victim's family, though the chilling precision of her planning left little doubt of the deliberate nature of her crimes. The first court proceedings began on July 14th, 2023, in the Busan District Court, casting a spotlight on the young woman whose calculated actions had shocked the nation. In the courtroom, the motive behind Young's crime was laid bare: a festering resentment toward her family, a crushing sense of helplessness born from repeated failures in college entrance exams and employment, and a simmering anger that had driven her down a dark path. She pleaded for leniency, claiming that hallucinations and a series of mental health struggles had compelled her to commit the murder, painting a picture of a mind at war with itself. Yet the evidence told a different story. Phone records revealed that only days before the crime, Young had sent death threats to her father, while her internet history detailed meticulous searches on methods to kill and dispose of a body. The prosecution presented additional instances of her plotting, including failed attempts to lure a teenage boy and a young woman to secluded locations along Nakdong River, both foiled by circumstance or suspicion, showing a pattern of careful planning rather than impulsive behavior. After months of scrutiny, on November 24th, 2023, the court delivered its verdict: guilty of homicide, desecration, and abandonment of a corpse. Presiding Judge Kim Taeob rejected her claims of mental illness, stating clearly that her actions had been deliberate and premeditated. Despite arguments from her lawyers and her own apologies, the court imposed a life sentence, with the added measure of a 30-year location tracking device and eligibility for parole only after 20 years, cementing the judgment that Young's crime was not a moment of madness, but a calculated and chillingly executed act that left an indelible mark on Busan and the country as a whole. Following the Busan District Court's life sentence, the legal battle surrounding Young's fate intensified as the prosecution, unsatisfied with the ruling, appealed for a harsher punishment on November 28th, while Young herself petitioned 2 days later for a reduced sentence. South Korea retains the death penalty in law, but it has not been enforced since 1997, leaving the courts to wrestle with the moral and legal weight of such a rare measure. The case moved to the Busan High Court, which in March reiterated that capital punishment should only be applied in exceptionally limited circumstances, rejecting the prosecution's request. Undeterred, the prosecution escalated the appeal to the Supreme Court, prompting a full review of the case in May 2024. On June 13, 2024, the Supreme Court upheld the life sentence, confirming that the original judgment was appropriate when taking into account Young's age, calculated behavior, personal background, and the clear motive behind the murder. Experts observing the case noted the chilling nature of Young's actions. According to forensic psychology professor Lee Soo-young from Kyunghee University, her lack of panic or hesitation was unusual for someone who had committed such a violent crime, reflecting a cold and meticulous disposition. Lee further posited that beyond her resentment toward her family, Young's theft of the victim's ID card and wallet suggested a deeper motive, a desire to appropriate another's identity, potentially fueled by her repeated failures to gain university admission, highlighting how her frustrations had been warped into a carefully planned and disturbing act that left a lasting mark of fear and distrust within her community. Case 9. Andrei Chikatilo was born on October 16, 1936 in the small village of Yablok, nestled in the Sumy Oblast of the Ukrainian SSR, during one of the darkest chapters in Ukraine's history as the country struggled to recover from the devastating famine caused by Joseph Stalin's forced collectivization of agriculture. His parents, both laborers on the local collective farm, eked out a meager existence in a single-room hut, receiving no wages for their labor and relying solely on the small plot of land behind their home to grow what little food they could. Hunger was a constant companion in the Chikatilo household, and Andrei later recalled that he did not taste bread until the age of 12, subsisting for long stretches on grass, leaves, and whatever foraged sustenance could keep him alive. His early life was marked not only by starvation, but also by stories that haunted him for decades. His mother Anna told him that before his birth, an older brother named Stepan had been abducted and cannibalized by starving neighbors, a tale whose truth remains unverified, but one that left an indelible psychological scar on young Andrei. Growing up amid the relentless hardships of rural poverty, the cruelty of wartime conditions, and the humiliations and ridicule inflicted by those around him, Chikatilo's childhood became a landscape of deprivation, fear, and isolation, shaping a fragile psyche in which hunger, deprivation, and the grotesque tales of survival intertwined to form the early, grim foundation of the man he would become. During the turbulent years of the Second World War, Andrei Chikatilo's early life was further scarred by the brutal realities of conflict. His father, Roman, was conscripted into the Red Army and later captured after being wounded in battle, leaving young Andrei and his mother, Anna, to endure the war's horrors alone. Between 1941 and 1944, the Nazi occupation of Ukraine brought bombings, fires, and shootings to their village, and Chikatilo would later describe these years as witnessing sheer horrors. He and his mother were often forced to hide in cellars and ditches to survive, sometimes watching helplessly as their hut was burned to the ground. The psychological strain of war compounded the difficulties of his already deprived upbringing. Sharing a single bed with his mother in their cramped one-room hut, Andrei, who was a chronic bedwetter, suffered regular beatings and harsh beratings, leaving deep emotional wounds. In 1943, the birth of his baby sister, Tatiana, added another layer of complexity to his childhood. With his father away at war, speculation has suggested that Tatiana may have been the result of a sexual assault by German soldiers, a horrifying reality faced by many Ukrainian women during the occupation. If this were true, the trauma of her conception and birth may have been witnessed by Andrei himself, imprinting early exposure to violence, fear, and human cruelty onto his formative years in a home already dominated by scarcity and war. The years of Andrei Chikatilo's childhood during World War II were marked by fear, deprivation, and a sense of constant danger. His father, Roman, had been drafted into the Red Army and later captured after being wounded, leaving Andrei and his mother, Anna, to endure the harsh realities of the war on their own. From 1941 to 1944, their village in Ukraine was under Nazi occupation, and Andrei often watched in terror as bombings shook the ground, fires consumed nearby homes, and gunfire echoed through the streets. Many nights were spent huddled in cellars and muddy ditches, clinging to his mother for safety, sometimes helplessly witnessing their own small hut go up in flames. In the cramped one-room space they shared, Andrei slept beside his mother, and his chronic bedwetting drew her anger and harsh punishments. Each scolding, each strike, etched deep emotional scars into his young mind. The birth of his baby sister Tatiana in 1943 brought both wonder and confusion, yet the circumstances of her conception may have been traumatic, as it is thought she might have been the product of a violent assault by German soldiers, a grim reality faced by many women under occupation. If this was true, Andrei's earliest memories were intertwined with scenes of fear, helplessness, and human cruelty, shaping a childhood defined not only by hunger and war, but by an unsettling intimacy with suffering and violence that he could neither understand nor escape. By the time Andrei Chikatilo entered his teenage years, he had already begun to stand out among his peers, not just for his academic diligence, but also for his deep commitment to the ideals of communism. At 14, he assumed the role of editor of his school newspaper, carefully managing content and reporting on local school events. While 2 years later, he was entrusted with even greater responsibility as chairman of the Pupils' Communist Party Committee. Books on Marxist theory and revolutionary thought became his constant companions, and he took seriously every task assigned to him, from organizing street marches to ensuring the school's ideological activities were executed flawlessly. Despite his apparent discipline and leadership, Andrei struggled privately with his studies. Frequent headaches and a poor memory made learning a slow and laborious process. Yet his determination never wavered, and he distinguished himself as the only student from his collective farm to complete the final year of school, graduating in 1954 with outstanding grades, a rare accomplishment that highlighted both his resilience and his drive to rise above the hardships of his upbringing. As Chikatilo entered puberty, he became painfully aware of his body's limitations. He struggled with chronic impotence, a condition that magnified his already intense social awkwardness and fed a growing sense of self-loathing. Interacting with girls, something most of his peers navigated with ease, became a source of anxiety and fear. Every glance, every casual conversation left him feeling exposed and inadequate, deepening the isolation he already felt in the world around him. At 17, Chikatilo developed his first crush on a girl named Lilia Beresheva, whom he had met through his work on the school newspaper. Despite his feelings, he was painfully shy around her, so nervous and self-conscious that he never found the courage to ask her out. The same year, Chikatilo jumped upon an 11-year-old friend of his younger sister and wrestled her to the ground. Ejaculating as the girl struggled in his grasp after graduating from school, Chikatilo set his sights on Moscow State University, hopeful that a scholarship could open the door to a brighter future. He prepared diligently and passed the entrance exams with good to excellent scores, yet he was ultimately denied a place. Chikatilo later speculated that his father's wartime history, being captured and labeled a traitor, had influenced the decision, though in reality, other candidates had simply outperformed him in an intensely competitive examination. Disappointed but undeterred, he did not pursue further university applications. Instead, he moved to Kursk, taking up manual labor for a few months before enrolling in a vocational school to train as a communications technician in 1955. That same year, Chikatilo embarked on his first serious romantic relationship with a local girl 2 years younger than him. Though he attempted intimacy on 3 occasions, he struggled with impotence, a difficulty that deepened his feelings of frustration and inadequacy. After 18 months, the relationship ended, leaving him to wrestle with the insecurities and social anxieties that would shadow much of his young adulthood. After finishing his 2-year vocational program, Andrei Chikatilo moved to Nizhny Tagil, a bustling industrial city in the Urals, to join a large construction project. Determined to improve himself, he also enrolled in engineering correspondence courses through the Moscow Electrotechnical Institute of Communication, juggling long days of labor with study. For 2 years, he immersed himself in the rhythm of the factory city, learning the skills that might secure him a stable future. In 1957, Chikatilo's life took a sharp turn when he was drafted into the Soviet Army. His service lasted 3 years, first on the remote borders of Central Asia, then in East Berlin with a KGB communications unit. He carried out his duties without fault, earning respect for his discipline. And before leaving the military in 1960, he joined the Communist Party, aligning himself with the ideals he had embraced since his school days. Once discharged, he returned to his small village, living with his parents and helping on the collective farm. It was here that Chikatilo became involved with a local divorcee. Their relationship lasted only a few months, marked by repeated failures to consummate the union. The situation turned bitterly public when the woman, unaware of the damage it could cause, mentioned his difficulties to friends. Gossip spread quickly, and soon the villagers were whispering about his impotence. The humiliation crushed him. In later interviews, Chikatilo recalled the depth of his shame. He had even attempted to take his own life, only to be saved by his mother and neighbors. Feeling rejected and ostracized, he concluded that no one could ever accept him as he was, and he fled the village, desperate to escape the weight of his ruined reputation and the constant reminders of his inadequacy. By 1961, Chikatilo had secured a position as a communications engineer in the small town of Rodinovo-Nesvitayskaya, about 20 miles north of Rostov-on-Don. He moved to the Russian SFSR, renting a modest apartment near his new workplace, eager to establish some stability in his adult life. That same year, his younger sister Tatyana finished school and came to live with him, as their parents prepared to relocate to the Rostov region. For 6 months, Tatyana shared the small apartment with her brother. She remembered him as intensely shy, especially around women, but otherwise saw nothing particularly alarming in his day-to-day life. Hoping to help him build a more conventional life, she eventually arranged her own marriage to a local man, moving into her in-laws' home, while continuing to encourage her brother to find a wife and start a family of his own. In 1963, Chikatilo entered into marriage with Feodosia Odnikiva, a woman introduced to him by his younger sister. While he felt a certain attraction to her, the union was largely orchestrated by his sister and her husband, and the couple married just 2 weeks after meeting. A brief courtship shaped more by family influence than romantic choice. Chikatilo later described their married life as deeply constrained by his sexual difficulties. Aware of his inability to maintain an erection, the couple devised a method to conceive. Chikatilo would ejaculate externally, and Feodosia would manually introduce his semen to achieve pregnancy. In 1965, this arrangement resulted in the birth of their daughter, Ludmila, and 4 years later, a son named Yuri was born. Despite the unconventional circumstances, the family expanded, marking a new chapter in Chikatilo's life. In 1964, Chikatilo decided to continue his education through correspondence courses at Rostov University, focusing on Russian literature and philology. Over the next 6 years, he dedicated himself to his studies, eventually earning his degree in 1970. Around the same time, he began working in a managerial role overseeing regional sports activities, a position he held for just 1 year before transitioning into teaching. He took a post at vocational school number 32 in Novoshakhtinsk, where he was assigned to teach Russian language and literature. Despite his knowledge of the subjects, Chikatilo struggled to connect with his students. His shy and modest nature made it difficult for him to assert authority, and he often found himself the target of ridicule in the classroom. Discipline was elusive, and he faced daily challenges trying to maintain control, leaving him frustrated and increasingly isolated in his professional life. Part of Chikatilo's role at the school was to check that the boarding students were in their dormitories each evening. On several occasions, he misused this responsibility by entering the girls' dormitory, seeking to observe them undressed. At other times, Chikatilo came across adolescent students in the dormitories engaging in sexual activity. He later described feeling disturbed by these encounters, remarking that seeing young people engaging in acts he himself had not experienced even by the age of 30 left a lasting impression on him. In May 1973, Chikatilo carried out his first documented sexual assault on a student under his supervision. In this incident, he swam towards a 15-year-old girl and groped her breasts and genitals, ejaculating as the girl struggled against his grasp after receiving numerous complaints from students. The school director called Chikatilo to a formal meeting, giving him the choice to resign or be dismissed. Chikatilo quietly left and secured a teaching position at another school in Novoshakhtinsk in January 1974. He lost that job due to staff cutbacks in September 1978 and later began teaching at technical school number 33 in Shakhty, a coal mining town 47 miles north of Rostov. By Chikatilo's own admission, by the mid-1970s, his desire to view naked children drove him to loiter around public toilets, where he frequently spied on young girls. He also purchased chewing gum, which he gave to female children he encountered in efforts to initiate contact and gain their trust. Chikatilo is known to have sexually assaulted at least 3 girls whom he encountered via this method. Chikatilo's teaching career came to an end in March 1981 after multiple complaints of sexual misconduct involving his students. That same month, he started working as a supply clerk at a construction materials factory in Rostov. This new position required him to travel widely across the Soviet Union, either to acquire the raw materials needed for production or to negotiate supply contracts. September 1978. The industrial town of Shakhty was quiet that year, its streets emptying into long, cold nights. Into this town came Andrei Chikatilo, a man who carried a darkness few could imagine. On the evening of December 22nd, he spotted 9-year-old Yelena Zakitnova, innocent and unaware. She followed him to an old, crumbling hut he had secretly purchased earlier that year. The building was abandoned, its walls rotting, the air thick with dust and silence, as if it were waiting for something terrible to happen. Inside, Chikatilo tried to assault her, but his attempt failed. Frustration and rage began to twist within him as Yelena struggled in fear. The helplessness of the situation for the child made the night grow darker, colder, heavier. Later, after his arrest in 1990, Chikatilo would recount that Yelena had said something very hoarsely during the attack. That small sound, in his mind, was enough to push him over the edge. He strangled her until she lost consciousness. When the deed was done, he carried her small, lifeless body to the nearby Grushevka River. He threw her into the cold water, and the river swallowed her silence. 2 days later, beneath the shadow of a nearby bridge, Yelena Zakitnova's body was found, a tragic and horrifying beginning to the spree that would later terrify the region. The night was silent again, but the memory of that evening lingered, a chilling echo of the darkness that had begun to awaken in Shakhty. Numerous pieces of evidence pointed to Chikatilo in the murder of Yelena Zakitnova. Investigators found spots of blood in the snow near a fence facing the house Chikatilo had secretly purchased, while neighbors confirmed that he had been present there on the evening of December 22nd. Zakitnova's school backpack was discovered on the opposite bank of the river at the end of the street, suggesting that she had been thrown into the water at that location. Additionally, a witness provided police with a detailed description of a man resembling Chikatilo, seen speaking with the girl at the bus stop where she had last been seen alive. Despite these clues, suspicion initially fell on a 25-year-old laborer named Alexander Kravchenko, who had a prior conviction for the rape and murder of a teenage girl. A search of Kravchenko's home uncovered spots of blood on his wife's jumper, which were later determined to match both Zakitnova and Kravchenko's wife, complicating the investigation further. Kravchenko had a solid alibi for the afternoon of December 22nd, as he had spent the entire time at home with his wife and a friend of hers, a fact that neighbors were able to confirm. Despite this, the police pressured Kravchenko's wife with accusations of being an accomplice to murder and threatened her friend with perjury. Under this pressure, the women gave new statements claiming that Kravchenko had not returned home until late that evening. Confronted with these altered testimonies, Kravchenko confessed to the killing. He was put on trial in 1979, but at the proceedings he retracted his confession, insisting that it had been obtained under extreme duress and that he was innocent. Nevertheless, the court convicted him of the murder and sentenced him to death. In December 1980, the Supreme Court commuted his sentence to 15 years imprisonment, the maximum allowed at the time. However, due to persistent pressure from the victim's relatives, Kravchenko was retried, wrongly convicted again, and ultimately executed by firing squad for Zakitnova's murder in July 1983. After the murder of Yelena Zakitnova, Chikatilo discovered that he could only achieve sexual arousal and orgasm through the act of stabbing and killing women and children. He later admitted that the compulsion to relive the experience became overwhelming, a dark force that constantly drove him. However, he emphasized that in the beginning, he struggled to control these urges, sometimes cutting short business trips and returning home to avoid the temptation to seek out a victim. The murder of Larissa Tkachenko marked a turning point for Chikatilo. The compulsion that had haunted him since Zakitnova's death now demanded release, and each act of violence only fueled the darkness within him. He began to patrol the streets and outskirts of Rostov and nearby towns, searching for victims he could overpower. He carefully selected young women and children who appeared vulnerable: schoolgirls, factory workers, or anyone who traveled alone. Chikatilo developed a pattern. He would approach them in public places, earn their trust with small talk or promises of money or alcohol, and then lead them to secluded spots. Once alone, his attacks were brutal and ritualized. He would often use his bare hands, sticks, or any available objects, and his violence escalated with each murder. The forests, riverbanks, and abandoned buildings of the region became silent witnesses to his spree. Each crime left its mark, and yet Chikatilo remained at large, blending into society as a seemingly ordinary man, a factory worker, a husband, a quiet neighbor. His ability to walk freely among the unsuspecting amplified the terror he would sow, making the hunt for him all the more urgent and desperate. 9 months after the murder of Larissa Tkachenko, on June 12, 1982, Chikatilo boarded a bus to the Bagayevsky district of Rostov to purchase vegetables. When he had to change buses in the village of Donskoy, he chose to continue his journey on foot, wandering through the quiet streets. It was there that he spotted 13-year-old Lyubov Buryuk, walking home after a shopping trip. The girl and Chikatilo walked together for a short distance, roughly a quarter of a mile, before the path ahead became obscured by thick bushes, shielding them from the eyes of any potential witnesses. In an instant, Chikatilo struck. He dragged Lyubov into the undergrowth, tore off her dress, and killed her with brutal stabbing and slashing, simulating intercourse in a chilling repetition of his compulsions. When her body was discovered on June 27th, the medical examiner documented the horrifying extent of the attack: 22 knife wounds across her head, neck, chest, and pelvic region. Further analysis revealed additional blows to the skull, suggesting she had been attacked from behind with both the blade and handle of the knife. Striations found around her eye sockets painted an even more terrifying picture of the violence inflicted that day, a methodical, remorseless act of brutality that left the community in shock. After the murder of Lyubov Buryuk, Chikatilo abandoned any attempt to resist his homicidal impulses. Between July and September 1982, he claimed the lives of 5 more victims, ranging in age from 9 to 18. A pattern had begun to emerge. He would approach children, runaways, and young vagrants at bus or railway stations, gaining their trust with casual conversation or promises of help, food, or shelter. Once alone, he would lead them to a forest, riverbank, or other secluded spot. There, his attacks became increasingly ritualized and violent. Most victims were stabbed, slashed, and eviscerated with a knife, though some suffered additional horrors, strangulation or brutal beatings, before death. The sheer brutality of his methods, combined with the calculated selection of vulnerable victims, marked the chilling escalation of Chikatilo's killing spree. Many of Chikatilo's victims bore horrifying evidence of mutilation, particularly around the eye sockets. Pathologists determined that these injuries were inflicted with a knife, indicating that the killer deliberately gouged out their eyes. His adult female victims were often prostitutes or homeless women, whom he lured to secluded locations with promises of alcohol or money. Chikatilo typically attempted intercourse, but when he was unable to achieve or maintain an erection, he would erupt into a murderous rage, especially if the woman mocked him. Sexual release came only through stabbing and slashing his victims to death. His child and adolescent victims included both boys and girls, whom he would carefully manipulate using ruses tailored during initial conversations, promising assistance, company, or showing a shortcut, offering food, candy, or the chance to view stamps, films, or coins, or simply leading them from a bus stop. Once isolated, he would often tie their hand behind their backs, shove mud or loam into their mouths to silence screams, and then kill them with brutal precision. Afterward, Chikatilo sometimes attempted to obscure the bodies, covering them with leaves, branches, or other debris, though these efforts were rudimentary and rarely prevented discovery. This combination of cunning, manipulation, and extreme violence revealed the calculated and ritualized nature of his crimes, making him one of the most terrifying serial killers in history. On December 11th, 1982, Chikatilo encountered 10-year-old Olga Stolmachanak as she rode a bus to her parents' home in Novoshakhtinsk. He persuaded the young girl to leave the bus with him, and a fellow passenger last saw them together, a middle-aged man firmly leading her away by the hand. Chikatilo took Olga to a cornfield on the outskirts of the city, where he unleashed a horrific attack. She was stabbed more than 50 times across her head and body. Her chest was ripped open, and her lower bowel and uterus were excised, a chilling escalation of his ritualized violence. By January 1983, investigators had tentatively linked 4 victims to the same killer. Moscow dispatched a specialized police team, led by Major Mikhail Fedosov, to Rostov to oversee the case, which became known internally as Operation Forest Path. Fedosov assembled a team of 10 investigators dedicated to solving the murders, and in March, forensic analyst Viktor Burakov was appointed to lead the investigation. The following month, when Stolmachanak's body was discovered, Burakov examined the scene and the child's mutilations, noting the striations on her eye sockets and the extensive knife wounds. He later stated that upon seeing these marks, any doubts about the existence of a serial killer were immediately erased. Chikatilo did not strike again until June 1983, when he murdered 15-year-old Laura Sarkisian, an Armenian girl whose body was later discovered in woodland near an unmarked railway platform outside Novichokhovsk. By September of that year, he had claimed the lives of 5 more victims. The mounting number of bodies, combined with the strikingly similar patterns of mutilation, forced Soviet authorities to confront a chilling reality. A serial killer was at large. On September 6, 1983, the public prosecutor formally linked 6 of the murders to a single perpetrator, confirming what investigators had long feared. The extreme brutality of the killings and the precise eviscerations puzzled investigators. Early theories range from a group harvesting organs for transplant to a satanic cult or the acts of a deranged individual. Much of the police focus fell on the idea that the killer was mentally ill, possibly homosexual, or a pedophile. Investigators meticulously checked the alibis of anyone who had spent time in psychiatric institutions or had prior convictions for homosexuality or pedophilia, logging their information in a detailed card system. Registered sex offenders were similarly scrutinized, and if their alibis were confirmed, they were removed from the investigation. Yet despite these efforts, the killer remained elusive, leaving the authorities grappling with a methodical and increasingly confident predator. Beginning in September 1983, the investigation into the string of murders was chaotic and misguided. Several young men confessed to the killings, though most were intellectually disabled youths who admitted guilt only under prolonged and often brutal interrogation. The pressure of these tactics proved deadly for some. 3 known homosexuals and a convicted sex offender took their own lives. Despite the controversy, the investigation led to the resolution of over 1,000 unrelated crimes, including 95 murders, 140 aggravated assaults, and 245 rapes. Yet as police secured these confessions, bodies continued to surface, proving that the true killer remained at large. On October 30th, 1983, the eviscerated body of 19-year-old prostitute Vera Shevkin was discovered in Shakhty. She had been murdered 3 days earlier. While the mutilations matched the pattern of the unknown killer, her eyes had not been gouged, leaving investigators puzzled. Then, 2 months later, on December 27th, 14-year-old Sergei Markov, a schoolboy from Dukovo, was lured from a train and killed at a rural station near Novichokhovsk. His body was found emasculated, with more than 70 knife wounds to his neck and upper torso, and eviscerated in the same brutal fashion that had become the signature of the elusive murderer. In the early months of 1984, Chikatilo's murderous spree continued unabated. In January and February, he killed 2 women in Rostov's Park of Aviators, leaving their bodies as silent witnesses to his escalating violence. On March 24th, he targeted 10-year-old Dmitry Tashnikov, luring the boy away from a stamp kiosk in Novoshakhtinsk. As they walked together, several witnesses observed Chikatilo and later provided investigators with detailed descriptions of the man responsible. When Dmitry's body was discovered 3 days later, police collected crucial forensic evidence: a footprint left by the killer and samples of semen and saliva on the boy's clothing. On May 25th, Chikatilo murdered a young woman, Tatyana Petrosyan, and her 10-year-old daughter, Svetlana, in a secluded wooded area outside Shakhty. Petrosyan had known Chikatilo for several years, which made the betrayal of trust all the more chilling. By the end of July, he had added 3 more young women, aged 19 to 21, and a 13-year-old boy to his growing list of victims, his attacks following the same brutal and ritualized patterns. Amid this spree, Chikatilo's personal life began to unravel. In the summer of 1984, he was fired from his position as a supply clerk for the alleged theft of 2 rolls of linoleum, a charge filed against him in February. Although he was asked to resign quietly, he refused, denying the accusations. By August 1st, he had secured a new job as a supply clerk in Rostov, continuing his ordinary facade while his dark impulses remained unchecked. On August 2nd, 1984, Chikatilo claimed the life of 16-year-old Natalia Golisovskaya in Rostov's Park of Aviators. Just 5 days later, he lured 17-year-old Lyudmila Alexieva to the banks of the Don River under the pretense of showing her a shortcut to a bus terminal. There, he unleashed a savage attack, slashing her body 39 times before mutilating and disemboweling her. Some of the wounds were inflicted deliberately in a manner he knew would not be immediately fatal. When her body was discovered the following morning, investigators noted the horrifying detail that her excised upper lip had been placed inside her mouth. Hours after Alexieva's murder, Chikatilo flew to Tashkent on a business trip to purchase electrical switches. By the time he returned to Rostov on August 15th, he had killed again an unidentified young woman and 10-year-old Admiral Sadolayeva. Within the following 2 weeks, the nude body of 11-year-old Alexander Chepel was found along the banks of the Don River, strangled, castrated, and with his eyes gouged out, just yards from where Alexieva's body had been discovered. Then, on September 6th, Chikatilo murdered 24-year-old Irina Lachinskaya, a young librarian, once more in the Park of Aviators, continuing his relentless spree across Rostov and its surrounding areas. On September 13th, 1984, Chikatilo was spotted by 2 undercover detectives while he attempted to approach young women at a bus station in Rostov. The detectives followed him as he wandered through the city, making furtive attempts to engage women and committing acts of frauderism in public. His movements eventually led him to the Central Market, where he was arrested and held for questioning. A search of his belongings revealed a knife with a 20-centimeter blade, several lengths of rope, and a jar of Vaseline, tools consistent with his violent crimes. Investigators also discovered that he was under investigation for a minor theft at a former place of employment, giving them the legal authority to detain him for an extended period. Chikatilo's background raised suspicion, and his physical description matched that of the man seen with Dmitry Tashnikov prior to the boy's murder. A blood sample taken from him revealed that he was type A, whereas semen samples collected from 6 victims killed during the spring and summer of 1984 had been classified as type AB. As a result, Chikatilo's name was added to the investigator's card index, but his blood type largely discounted him as the unknown killer, leaving him free to continue his deadly spree for the time being. Chikatilo was ultimately found guilty of theft from his previous employer. As a result, his membership in the Communist Party was revoked, and he was sentenced to 1 year in prison. However, he served only 3 months and was released on December 12, 1984, returning to society with his dark impulses unchecked. Meanwhile, on October 8, 1984, the head of the Russian Public Prosecutor's Office formally linked 23 of Chikatilo's murders into a single case, finally establishing that a single serial killer was responsible. At the same time, all charges against the mentally disabled youths who had previously confessed under duress were dropped, clearing the innocent while the real killer continued to evade capture. After his release from prison in December 1984, Chikatilo secured a position in the supply department of a locomotive factory in Novocherkassk and maintained a low profile, outwardly blending into ordinary life. Yet his dark urges remained, dormant but not defeated. He would not strike again until August 1st, 1985, when he was on a business trip to Moscow. There, he spotted 18-year-old Natalia Poklistova standing on a railway platform near Domodedovo Airport. Chikatilo lured her off the train into a thicket of woods near the village of Vostriakovo. Once alone, he bound her, stabbed her 38 times across her neck and chest, and finally strangled her to death. A brutal signature that investigators would later link to the unknown serial killer. Believing the killer might have flown from Rostov Oblast to Moscow, authorities combed through Aeroflot flight records for passengers traveling between the two regions in late July and early August. Chikatilo, however, had taken the train, leaving no documentation for investigators to track him. Just 4 weeks later, on August 27th, he struck again, murdering young Irina Gulieva in Shakhty. The injuries inflicted on Gulieva mirrored those of Poklistova, further cementing the terrifying link between the murders and confirming the continued presence of a methodical, mobile predator. By November 1985, the investigation into Chikatilo's killing spree had reached a critical stage. A special procurator, Isa Kostoyev, was appointed to oversee the case, now expanded to include 15 procurators and 29 detectives working exclusively on the manhunt. Every known murder was meticulously re-examined, and investigators launched another exhaustive round of questioning, focusing on known sex offenders and homosexuals who had been prominent suspects in earlier phases of the case. In December, the militia intensified patrols at railway and bus stations throughout Rostov, deploying plainclothes female officers to loiter and observe, hoping to intercept the killer in the act. For the first time in Soviet criminal history, a psychiatrist was consulted as part of the investigation. At the request of forensic analyst Viktor Burakov, Dr. Alexander Buchanovsky was brought in to study the case. All crime scene reports and medical examiner files were made available to him, with the goal of producing a psychological profile of the elusive murderer. Buchanovsky's insights would provide investigators with a crucial understanding of the killer's motivations and patterns, marking a pioneering step in Soviet criminal profiling and bringing the hunt for Chikatilo closer to a breakthrough.